In 2003, Ford became the title sponsor and sole engine supplier to the Champcar World Series. So this would be like the original IndyCar series before IRL. When Ford did this, they provided 5 SVT flagship vehicles to act as Fastlap Pace cars. These cars would take VIPs around the track for hot laps in between track activities and act as actual pace cars for the race at all of the races that took place. The 5 SVT vehicles were jokingly named the Fabulous Five. When the Champ Car World Series and IRL merged, the IRL basically stayed the same, but the Champ Car was dissolved. And so basically everything that was involved was sold off. All the Champ Car assets were put for auction. The timing, the video, audio, cars, scooters, office equipment, everything that they had, the semi trailers, and a handful of previous pace cars. But mysteriously, the 5 SVT vehicles were gone from that auction list, and their whereabouts were unknown until these 5 vehicles were noticed by some Mustang enthusiasts in Utah at Miller Motorsports Park, which is a big racetrack place in Utah, or at least it was. And at the time, these cars were there, and the silver one was actually purchased by Miller Motorsports Park, and the other cars were put up for sale. As you noticed in the picture, the first car of these 5 was a silver 03 Cobra Terminator. The second one in the picture is an SVT Lightning. The third one is an SVT Focus. The fourth one is a Red Fire SVT Cobra Terminator. And the fifth car was a Sonic Blue SVT Cobra Terminator that was a convertible. And so later, the story about the cars being for sale was that the 5 SVT cars were on loan to Champcar, and when Ford pulled the plug in 2007, Ford took those 5 SVT vehicles back and sold them for $1 a piece. And then Champcar kept all the other cars, Mustangs, Vipers, Ford GT, and all those cars went to auction in June or July of 2008 when Champcar merged. The silver Cobra was purchased by Miller and used as a track car. The Sonic Blue convertible was sold to a vendor at MMP for trade work. And then later this car has been seen on and off for sale over the years in Utah. The status of the Lightning is unknown. And the supercharged Sonic Blue Focus last was known to be in Portland. So at first glance, these cars look like they are normal Mustangs with a couple stickers on them, but they actually had some extensive work done to them to make them pretty good track cars. Overall, the Cobras had a very strong drivetrain from the factory. The Terminator Cobras had factory forged internals, a supercharger, T56 transmission, and so most of that remained stock. But the car did have some upgrades to it, and these are all the things that were done to these cars. First off, you actually had a fuel-safe racing fuel cell, kind of like the Cobra R. There were Brembo Gran Turismo front brakes with 2-piece slotted rotors. There was Cobra R front brake duct kit, so you can see those hoses going through to the brakes there, which use the extra location in the front bumper where there's a fog light on one side and a hole on the other. The interior kept the Terminator Cobra seats, which are great seats and very supportive and awesome. And it looks great inside the car. It looks like a normal Cobra, but you will notice a couple things by the radio section there. And the biggest news is it actually had a 6-point cage that was upholstered and a 5-point racing harness. So you can see the cage coming down into the floorboards there. You can see the harness there in the back where the seat belts could come through to the front, and the whole cage assembly. So this car was safe to ride in, and it had these racing provisions for safety, obviously. So these roll bars go into the trunk as well, and you can just see that nice padded and upholstered bar. You can see in the trunk there's a fire suppression system. There's a diff cooler. It's a Kenny Brown IRS diff cooler, and that's IRS brace as well on the back of the suspension there. Kind of hard to see up underneath there between the exhaust. It had Kenny Brown caster camber plates and a Kenny Brown strut tower brace. So that's this whole bar system that goes from strut tower to strut tower over the supercharger into the back by the firewall. Those were actually stock on some of the earlier 4.6-liter Mustang GTs, and Ford didn't put them on the Cobras, which is actually kind of funny because there's so much power. This was the most powerful produced Ford Mustang ever made at that point, and it didn't have a strut tower brace. And usually the reason for that would have been the supercharger clearance and I'm sure cost and everything. But Kenny Brown actually does make one. This one is made to fit over the Eaton supercharger, and a lot of people change the supercharger on these Cobras, and so that's probably a reason why they're not very common, because the size of the superchargers will get in the way of that brace, and so maybe people don't want to add those to the car, especially if they're going to do a blower swap. But anyway, it's not very common to see those on the Cobras, and usually it's because the supercharger's in the way. Underneath the car you can see this extra bracing, and that's Kenny Brown style frame connectors and the ladder system. Kind of difficult to see on this picture. This is on the silver car, which spent its life in northern Utah, so you can see some rust forming on there. But on the red fire car you can see that Kenny Brown bracing system on the upper section of the screen there. And here you can see it has the stock catalytic converters and H-pipe from the factory, but the catback was something a little more special. It was a custom piece made to fit around the fuel cell, and you can see it has those dimples all the way through the catback system. And instead of mufflers, it just had these crimped and chambered sections of piping that made the car sound really good. Basically straight piped, or kind of like a straight through muffler or resonator. And it gave it a pretty good exhaust note. And while we're under here, you can see that the drive shaft has a drive shaft loop. That's a Kenny Brown piece, and that's basically bolted in place in case something breaks on the transmission or the differential and the drive shaft doesn't come beating off and causing trouble and coming off the car, and that loop keeps it in place. It's a safety thing. You can see the engine looks about stock, the supercharger pulley shroud is still there. The car on a factory tune is very safe and very reliable, able to handle a lot of power and a lot of racing the way it comes. It does have a K&N filter system there in the front. It's actually called the K&N FIPK kit. Going inside, looking at that switch panel where the radio used to be, there's the fire suppression system, and there's a master power kill system. So those switches are the same in the different cars, but the stickers are slightly different, so pretty neat. It has the strobe light button there as well. Crowd alert. No jokes there about crowd control. But if you look inside, you can see that big box on the inside of the roof. That's actually a cover for a big hole that was cut towards the rear of the vehicle, and that was for the ginormous triangle-shaped Welland track strobe light system. And so it was an arrow strobe, and actually on the red fire car, the truck driver for Ford broke the one that was on that car as he was loading the 5 Pace cars back and taking them back to Ford. And so when the new owner of the red fire car got the car and noticed that the light was broken, he tried to track down where they were made and found out that they were one-off custom lamps made by a company in Michigan, and they were $2,800 each. Now there were 13 cars, the Toyotas, Vipers, Corvettes, Cobras, Contours, Focus, you know, cars like that that had these lamps for this activity. So it gives you an idea of how much of a budget that the Champ car was running in the day. But with that broken light, the owner had to dig around, and he finally found somebody who was in charge of the Pace car program named Joel Butland, and he was able to help him track down a mint replacement light, and it was the only one. He said, be careful with this, it's the only one left in existence. So now the red fire car does have that back on with all the strobe lights and all the lights functioning on the car now. So the owner of the red fire Terminator Cobra's name was Johnny, and he was known here in Utah as Mustang Johnny. Very awesome guy, very well respected in the community. He knew everything about Mustangs, and he was an absolute fanatic, and I've only heard good stories about him. I have a friend here in town who knew him personally, and they were great friends. And Johnny loved this Red Fire Cobra. He actually had owned 3 Terminator Cobras that were Red Fire cars. He said they were all theft projects, and so the first one he could not get a title for, so he ended up parting it out. The second one was too far gone, and the third one he ended up selling it to buy a 1970 Mach 1, and he swore he would never sell that 70 Mach 1. But when he found out that the old ex-Champcar Terminator Cobra was available and found out it was the Red Fire car, he made his decision to sell that Mach 1, and he bought that Red Fire car. And that's what sealed the deal for him to go ahead and get rid of the 70 and get this historic car. So when they started racing the '03 Cobras in 2003, they had the stock Cobra wheels and the stock brakes. And after they got back from the European races, they modified the cars to get the Brembo brakes and the BBS LM wheels. And so even though these are the LM wheels, they did have the BBS RK wheels on the Red Fire car, and they had a couple of different finishes on them, 2 different sets. And so the BBS rep insisted that the Red Fire car got the new RK plasma wheels, and the car also had a set of the silver RKs. And so they had all these different sets of wheels that they were swapping out so that the car was never down for more than 30 minutes. And then towards the middle of 2005, the plasma coating was coming off, so they alternated between the silver finish RKs and the LM wheels. And when he found the car for sale in 2009, it had the silver RKs on it. And the person who was brokering the deal told them to keep the BBS wheels to bring the price down. And after he had found that out, he tried really hard to reverse that move, but there was no luck. And so they put the RKs on another car and sold it. So he worked really hard to try to get the wheels back or get a similar set for that car. Some of the coolest pictures are of the Cobras riding in an airplane on crates on top of the race cars. And when they would move these cars around, they actually used a forklift to pick up the Cobras and put them on top of the crate. And so these are some cool pictures of them loading the Cobras up and moving them around, and that actually leads to an interesting story about the taillights of this car. If you had a good eye, you would notice that the Red Fire Terminator Cobra actually had the amber taillights, which are the 99 to 01 Mustang Cobra amber taillights, and they're export taillights as well for cars that go out of the country. And the real story here that's interesting about why the Red Fire car had the amber taillights was because back in the day, the Champcar Pace team was sponsored by PPG until Ford took over in '03. And so the fleet was quite diverse. And Mustang-wise, they had several Mustangs, including a '94 Indy Pace car, a '95 GT, and they had a lot of '95 Cobra R stuff on it. And they had 2 '99 Cobra convertibles. One of them was painted PPG laser red, and it had been on eBay actually, and it was listed at $40,000 and had not sold. But the other '99 Cobra they had was orange with white, and it had the Champcar logo on the hood. Well, at one point, someone struck the orange and white Cobra into a tire wall and basically totaled the car. So the orange Cobra basically turned into a parts car. And then in 2004 or 2005, when the Red Fire car was being unloaded off an airplane in Australia, a forklift driver busted out the driver's side tail light. And with no replacements anywhere, they got on the phone and they called back to their shop in Indianapolis, and they had them go ahead and take the taillights out of that '99 Cobra and send them FedEx all the way to Australia as quickly as they could. And on a side note, that '99 Cobra was actually found for sale. Somebody had listed this, and it says, you know, '99 Ford Mustang SVT convertible Champcar Pace car. So it says 8,000 miles, needs airbags and some paint work. Looks like 8,900 or best offer. But it actually turns out that someone on SVT Performance said that they owned a shop and a customer had brought the car into the shop for restoration work, and the car was really not that rough. He said it needed some paint work, it needed a thorough cleaning, and there were some parts missing like the tail lights and some other minor things, but he said that's all been replaced and the car is back to its original condition. But back to the Terminator Cobra and the tail lights and everything. They liked the fact that they could keep the brake lights, the turn signals, and all the reverse lights and run the strobe bulbs in the amber turn signal area. So that was very interesting because if you look at these taillights, they are set up differently with the bulbs and the harnesses. And so they almost switched all the Terminator Cobras over to this setup. But everybody loves the amber taillights, and Johnny, the owner of the car, was excited because his first Red Fire Cobra actually had the amber taillights in it as well, so it reminded him of his first car, but his was the only one to receive that. Johnny really liked the Cobra R, and so he also loved this Terminator because it had a lot of stuff that the Cobra R had, but also the greatest things that the Terminator Cobra had to offer. So in a way, he had the best of both worlds, and he was able to go with his sister and go out to Miller Motorsports Park a couple of times and have some fun. It was with deep, heartfelt regret and respect that I mentioned that in about 2012, Johnny had passed away from cancer. And so he left the car behind to his family, and they now have it and they keep it as part of his legacy and memory. And he had some other cars like a yellow Mach 1, and that car is actually here in town where I live, and my friend who knew Johnny personally owns that car now. And so it's cool to have that car around and to hear the stories about Mustang Johnny, because I never got to meet him, but I heard he was an awesome guy. So here are some pictures of the car on the racetrack. There's a few really neat pictures of it driving around as well as the other cars, and it's fun to see these pictures and think of these cars as something special that a lot of people got to experience. And when you see it here on the track, you read stories about people who say they saw it rip by and it was their first experience of seeing a Terminator Cobra ripping around the track. So that's really fun to see. Now, these cars did get to take some people for rides, and there were some people who got to record that, and it's very old footage, but here is some of the cars in action. You can hear the superchargers screaming, you can see the four drivers. In fact, there was a female driver driving the red Cobra in a couple of these videos, and that's really cool to see, and she was doing a fantastic job. So here's some footage of the red Cobra at the San Jose Grand Prix. Man, that sounded fantastic. Looked like so much fun. So that's pretty awesome to see these Terminator Cobras out there racing around, doing hot laps. professional drivers on places where they're so close to where they could hit a wall and be done for so quickly, but they survived so many years like that. And just really cool, great drivers, great experience, fun to see. So later on a thread, there was somebody who said, I'm the owner of the Sonic Blue convertible. I have the car. So far it needs a little TLC here and there, but it's in great shape. The rear brakes on my car were completely fried. Someone did some serious burnouts with the car. Of course, the tires in the rear are bald. I love the Brimbos out front and the BBS wheels, and he goes on to mention that right now the car has 11,000 miles on it. So pretty cool to see that car show up now and again, and of course these cars could have changed hands over the years, but that was the last thing I saw about it. Now, speaking of the silver car, it was sold to Miller, like I mentioned earlier, and then it recently just went up for sale. I actually found the car. It's only about 40 miles away from me. You can see the bumpers are scuffed up pretty bad. I'm sure it needs to be repainted, or at least the bumpers and side skirts, but has the Miller Motorsports logo on the hood, still has the light on the top. It's pretty cool to see the car, and when I first saw this car listed for sale, I was pretty sure it was one of these cars, but I wasn't positive. And seeing the Miller stuff all over it, I thought maybe Ford had made a couple of them like this, and that Miller had bought one to be a track car. But it's pretty cool to find out that this is one of those fabulous 5 cars. So this is a neat car that has a lot of history. I'm not sure about the price. It's on kind of a weird auction website, and there's not any details at all about it. And I've seen something about $30,000. I'm not sure if that was a real price or if it was something that it could be bid up to, so not sure. Now, you could be getting a really cool low mileage Cobra with history if that's something you're really into, or you could look at it as this has been a track car and it's had some abuse, and maybe it's not the right car for you. So pretty cool to see though, and go through all these pictures. It's the most amount of pictures I've seen with these cars, and there's the VIN number and everything. It has the Y in it for supercharged V8 4.6 liter, so that's the Terminator Cobra distinction letter. So if you look at a Cobra and it has the Y and the VIN number like that, then you know it's a real Cobra. So the interior looks pretty good. It still has the roll bars inside and the light on the top and all that stuff, and the odometer is showing about 8,200 miles on there, so relatively low mileage for a Terminator Cobra, even though it's been all over the world and run pretty hard. So pretty cool to see. Nice car. Hopefully somebody who appreciates it will get the car. It depends on whether someone's going to buy this and retain its originality or try to turn it back into a low mileage Cobra, because they bring decent money these days. But these are all just pictures of inside the car. And I noticed that they had some kind of a like insulation wrap over the fuel rail and fuel lines. Not sure if that was something they did or if it was something that Ford had done or whoever had actually built these cars back then. But there's the engine bay shots, and they had a little video of the car running and driving. So it seems like the car runs alright, maybe a little bit of a struggle when it first started, but they said the car had been sitting for a very long time and the tires are dated for 2010. In the videos of the car, of it running, there is a video and it's titled Engine Blow-By at Idle, Subjective Observation Minor. And I don't know if that's really a thing. Blow-by is when you get oil past the rings and it's coming up into the cylinder heads and it's smoking a little bit out the oil cap. If you take off the oil cap and it smokes, then it could just be condensation. I don't see anything in the video. I don't know why. It says that maybe they're just noting that maybe it's normal for a supercharged engine that's been run really hard like this over the years. But anyway, here's the video of that. I didn't really see anything that I would have noticed. But you can just see the sway bar and the ducting and the shocks and stuff. A lot of underside pictures, and it's not the cleanest car for an 8,000 mile car. Definitely a northern Utah car. I don't imagine this car was probably ever driven on the road very much. I think 8,000 miles is about what they had on them after all the racing and stuff. Maybe they did, but northern Utah does have ice and snow and salt on the roads, and so the wheels are kind of gouged up and curb rashed, and this was basically a race car. So if you look at it for what it is and not be too critical, then it's a pretty cool car with a lot of history. On the other hand, if you're looking for a nice low mileage Cobra, this might not be exactly what you're looking for. So anyway, there's the springs. It said it had coilovers, and the other car too, but they had shocks on all the pictures I saw of the cars. But anyway, that's just a little bit of the underside of the car. But really cool to see a Terminator Cobra that has history like this for sale and nearby. Not sure if the hood just doesn't close all the way, or if it's popped in the picture, or if maybe it had some bump and it doesn't line up right anymore. Hard to tell. But anyway, cool story. Cool to know about these cars. I'd always known about Mustang Johnny's car, and when I saw this pop up, I wondered if it was one of those cars, and it was. So really fun to see all this. And if somebody ends up buying this car and you see the video, please put that in the comments. And if you got to ride in one of these cars, put that in the comments. And if you saw one of these cars racing, put that in the comments, or whatever you want to say. I love reading through the comments. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more Mustang content.